Gimme. Hi, I'm Shane and welcome to Relative Time. And this is actually a relative timeout video, which means I'm going to talk about something a little different. And today, this is kind of more of a gear-related video, as I want to talk about a new toy I picked up, which is the DJI Osmo Pocket, and specifically about how well or how poorly it works for watch photography. Now, I actually showed off a few things I was doing with it on my Instagram, and I had a few questions and comments about it, so this is more of a follow-up to that. But if you have no interest in this camera at all, then I will also be having some previews of some watches I'll be reviewing in the next few weeks, including a mostly successful unboxing of the new Phoibos Bronze Eagle Ray. The Osmo Pocket has been out for quite some time, and there are already a ton of great videos about it and how to use it and the specs and everything you want to know about in detail, so I don't really want to do that here. But if you haven't seen anything about it, the short version is that it's a very small camera from DJI. And DJI is one of the best drone companies out there. So basically they took their camera and gimbal technology and put it kind of on this little stick. And it can either be used as a standalone device or you can hook it up to your phone to get some extra capabilities. When I first saw the Osmo Pocket, I immediately thought it was going to be a great camera for YouTubers and especially vloggers. So I was kind of interested, but not really that interested because it's not really what I do here. Yet in the last few months, I've had a few close family members buy one, and they don't even have any interest in YouTube, let alone vlogging. So I thought the interest is now expanded into the general public. And I didn't really buy this specifically for the channel. I bought it because I thought it would make a great travel camera, and maybe for those instances where I wanted something better than my cell phone, but I really didn't want to lug around my big camera. But whenever I do get something new, I am always curious about how I can use it for the channel, and that's what I want to talk about today. So the first way to use this camera is going to be the obvious choice, and that's as a vlogging camera, which does come in handy, as with a quick couple button pushes, you can flip the camera around and look directly at you as you're walking around, and it can even track your face. Now, I used to do intros and outros on occasion, kind of out and about. Thought it would make the video a little bit more interesting, but I haven't done that for a while for a couple of reasons. Mostly because it was a lot more time consuming to go somewhere and shoot something. Not to mention this is much less of a controlled environment, so there's a lot more background noise, as well as this is Texas. So it's either going to be really, really windy, or like today, hotter than hell, even though it's still in the middle of September. But as the weather starts to cool down, I might do this a little bit more often because it's a whole lot easier with this thing. Another nice feature is that this has the ability to track an object, either when you're holding it and moving the camera around it, or you can set it down and it can track you as you move around, which when you're trying to do all of this by yourself, can be really handy. But one of the real questions is just about general watch photography. And here it does have some limited success. And in many ways, it kind of falls into the same shortcomings that most cell phone cameras and most point-and-shoot cameras have. And that's that it really comes down to the minimal focal length of the lens. A lens is only good for a certain range, and in most of these situations, the manufacturers pick one that'll work the best for most situations, which generally doesn't include really up-close or macro-level photography. And no matter how much digital wizardry companies are able to do these days, you just can't beat physics and the limitations of the lens. So here, if you're any closer than about 6 inches, then the Osmo Pocket really starts to lose focus. Yet you can still work within these limitations. It kind of depends on what you're doing. In most situations, you can simply zoom in and get a good shot out of that. And even with video, you can still record in 4K and then just zoom in editing. So it's really workable, but not necessarily ideal. Although even with these limitations, you can get some interesting shots, such as set the camera to follow the watch and then move the camera around it. Or here, I was trying to remote control the gimbal through my cell phone and pan around it. It's not quite as smooth as I would like, but it's still smoother than what I could do by hand. You can even try to do a wrist shot by having it focus and follow the watch as you move your arm around. And that selfie mode might just help you get a good pocket shot. You could even try a flyby effect like I'm trying here. The trick is that when you're using the camera by itself, that screen is rather small, so it's kind of hard to tell when you're really in focus or when you're out of focus. There are also some really cool pre-programmed story modes, where it does this kind of cool cinematic transition for you. They're interesting, but I'm not really sure if I'd actually use it. Although these were already some limitations I was expecting. What I was hoping the camera could do is maybe help me do some interesting time-lapse shots, or specifically motion-lapse, where you can pre-program the gimbal to move across the watch while it's doing the time-lapse. But unfortunately, the Osmo Pocket completely fails at what I want it to do here. I can set it up just fine and tell it to pan from top to bottom of the watch, but as soon as I start the time-lapse, it goes out of focus. And I think this is really just a programming issue. If I tell it to do a regular time-lapse, it works just fine. But if I tell it to move in any particular way, it immediately loses focus. And I think this is because the camera just tries to focus out to infinity rather than what I told it to focus on. And to be fair, if you are doing a time-lapse, this is really what you want it to do. You want it to focus on the background rather than the foreground, so I can't really be too mad about that. I just wish there was some way to override it and have it focus exactly where I want it to. So here, it's pretty much a big fail for what I wanted it to do. Almost. Where things get interesting, however, is when I try to do a macro motion lapse. And I had to buy a macro lens separately, and it's just this tiny little thing with a magnet, and it just sort of snaps onto the camera. And unfortunately, the only macro lens I could find is a 10x, so the camera has to get really close to the watch in order to use it. But with that magnification and getting the camera distance just right, it can actually stay in focus over the entire duration. And that can lead to some truly beautiful shots, such as with the Comet chronograph here. It just looks fantastic. Although to be fair, it always looks fantastic in macro. There's also the Eagle Ray here, and it doesn't look quite as good, but it is a bit of a darker dial and color scheme. And there's also a little bit of lint on the top of the Bronze Eagle swordfish, but again, it just looks gorgeous. I did a few more of these as well, just trying to get that distance dialed in. And there is a bit of trial and error in that. And as you can see here with the SWC diver, the logo is not quite in focus. And the same can be said for my first attempt with the Orient Kamasu, but a second attempt looked much better. And I really just love that dial on the Orient Kamasu. And finally, here's the Orient Triton, or rather its power reserve. So there's definitely some promise here, although the bigger question is whether or not it's worth the trial and error trying to figure out how to dial it in rather than just use my regular setup. But it's something I'll play around with a little bit more. The other area that I thought this might help in is more hands-on kind of videos, like unboxing or maybe mod videos. And not just because the camera is smaller and that I can actually see what I'm working on, but because of that tracking ability, it could keep everything right in frame. So in order to test it, and I do want to stress test it, I attempted an unboxing of the new Bronze Eagle Ray from Phoibos. And I didn't really want to use this as a separate video because it is really short and it didn't work exactly how I wanted it to. But I thought it'd be fun to show it off here. And I started off by telling it to track the box, and it actually decided to track the cardboard cover rather than the case itself. Which is not what I wanted, but on one hand is actually quite impressive that it can tell the difference. So on a second attempt, I told it to track the case itself and then stuck it back in the sleeve. And it did actually follow the case, which again is a bit impressive. But let me skip ahead to when I actually unzip it, just for those that really want to see the Eagle Ray. And like the Great Wall, the Bronze Eagle Ray does come in its own travel case, which is really nice if you want to travel with it. And as a really nice bonus, it does come with 3 different straps, as well as a spring bar tool. There's an extra brown leather one and a silicone strap. Although you'll notice that the second leather strap doesn't have a bronze buckle, so you will have to swap that. Now below that you do have the watch itself and its protective sleeve. And I did tell the Osmo to stop following the box and follow the watch instead here. But instead, it actually wound up following that plastic sleeve. So let me recenter and then refollow. Luckily, there's not a whole lot of plastic to take off here, but what's underneath really is beautiful. Now, since this was just a test, that's all I really recorded with my Osmo, but I'll give you a few more shots here with my normal camera. While the Bronze Eagle Ray looks like the stainless version, it is a very different beast. They upgraded the movement to a Sellita SW200, as well as beefed up the water resistance to 500 meters. Yet that also comes with an upgrade in price as well, and a really slight increase in total thickness to 14.3 millimeters. Yet the watch truly is gorgeous, and it has a very different feel from the Zello Swordfish in bronze. Where that one is a bit casual, this one has more of a classic feel. Currently, the stainless version of the Eagle Ray is completely sold out, and from what I hear, there will be some more coming, but not until next year. And I also hear that some of the specs are going to change. So the bad news is that if you're really a fan of the current Eagle Ray and never got one, it might already be too late. So far, my impression of the Bronze Eagle Ray is really positive, and I really like this version that I got, where it has the black dial and the black ceramic bezel rather than the bronze bezel. And in some ways, it kind of reminds me of a reverse GoldenEye combat sub, where you have a similar dial that's black with kind of some gold-orange highlights. Yet there, while the case is a black PVD with a bronzish bezel, here it's the opposite, where you have a black bezel with a bronze case. But again, I'll talk more about that in a few weeks. But back to the Osmo Pocket, and again, I think it shows promise for these kinds of videos, where I either just leave the camera static, or I'm a little quicker and smarter about what I tell it to focus on. But in general, I think it's a great camera for what it was intended for, and I'm actually pretty impressed with how it even handles indoor without extra light. But I should stress that what I'm trying to do here is not really what it was intended for. Although you can get away with some really interesting shots with this thing, but it's definitely not a camera to really build a whole channel around, unless you're just focusing on doing more of a podcast or you just really love doing rant videos, at which point this is definitely better than some of the webcams I've seen people roll with. Anyway, that's all I really have for you today, and this was a bit of a one-off video. I'm not really planning on doing tech or gear-related videos on a regular basis, but still let me know down below what you thought about it. Or if you have a topic kind of like this, but related to the channel as a whole, let me know as well. Otherwise, I'll be back early next week with another review video. Thanks for joining me.